Hello, welcome to Ray-ality TV. I'm Raymond Bakari. Today I'm joined by Malcolm Farmer III. He was a Republican city councilman in Providence from 1979 to 1991 and served as the city council minority leader from 1983 to 1991. To this date, he is the last Republican to serve on Providence's city council. Mr. Farmer, how are you today?
I'm fine, Raymond.
It's good to have you on. My first question, it's been quite some time since you were on the city council here in Providence. You represented Ward 2, I believe, on the east side of the city. What have you been up to since your time on the city council?
Well, I've continued, I practice law, and I've been a father and husband. But I've pretty much remained involved in politics, definitely non-Republican politics. I'm deeply involved in a whole series of nonprofit activities. Family Service of Rhode Island, to a great extent, is one, and anti-racism activities and projects at both schools I went to, and in speaking to Providence independent schools. Unfortunately, never in a public high school other than charter schools, just because I was never asked. And that's pretty much been it, although the reason for my involvement in anti-racism is that in 1965, when a year out of Harvard Law School, I quit my job and went to Mississippi and spent 2 years as a civil rights lawyer, which completely changed my life and basically resulted in a commitment to remain involved in trying to resolve racism and related issues. And the real reason I became a Republican when I ran for the city council was that my father, who was very conservative and former Republican state chairman, would have had a heart attack if I'd run as a Democrat. So I spared him. I spared him that. And I ended up being probably one of the most liberal members of the Providence City Council, although for most of my tenure being the only Republican. That's why I was the minority leader, because there was no one else.
And there is a clear difference between the Republicans now versus the Republicans back when you were first elected into office. From your perspective, what big differences do you see between the philosophy of Republicans then versus now?
Well, then there was plenty of room in the Republican Party for moderate and even liberal Republicans, as well as conservatives. John Chafee was governor and then United States Senator. I worked on his campaigns. I was very close to him. And the Rhode Island Republican leadership, to a great extent, at one point we were known as Rockefeller Republicans, but basically was moderate. So there was no ideological issue with being a Republican in those days. Today, there's just no room for moderates, and definitely not for liberals in the Republican Party, which is conservative / right wing on almost every issues, deeply affected by the influence of Trump and others. And so I've particularly on issues of voter suppression, and almost across the board, I find myself completely alienated from that party.
And you are the last Republican to this date to be elected to the city council in Providence. Most people don't know this because it's been quite some time, and the council has been overwhelmingly Democratic, even back then, but even more ever since. What's your reaction to the fact that there hasn't been a Republican on the city council in over 30 years?
Well, I think one of the reasons is the changes in the Republican Party that I mentioned, which clearly do not appeal to people of lower middle and lower class, and particularly racial minorities and others. And Providence is a city, so it has its fair share of those. But I think also the east side, which should logically be the place where a Republican might have a chance to get elected, as I was, it is pretty liberal in its outlook and progressive on issues. And so Republicans, although they've run, have really not either tried to raise issues to appeal to people in an urban northeastern setting, or to people with progressive points of view. So as long as that's the case, I don't think there will be a Republican. But if someone ran as a Republican on issues which were designed to appeal to people of a more moderate or progressive strain, there's no reason they couldn't get elected. I don't think it's going to happen given today's climate.
I was actually about to ask that as my next question. Do you think there would ever be like another Republican mayor in Providence with all this considered?
Based on what I just said, no. But again, there's based on someone who is really qualified and much more moderate and open to tolerance and treating every citizen, regardless of race or heritage or disability, as a citizen and asserting their rights. There's no reason that someone couldn't run. I mean, after all, there have been Republican governors up until recently, and there's no reason why there also couldn't be a Republican mayor. On the other hand, I think it's unlikely given the positions being taken by Republicans here as well as elsewhere.
Speaking of mayors, we do have a mayoral election this year. Currently, there are 3 declared candidates, all 3 Democrats. Gonzalo Cuervo, he served in multiple mayoral administrations. Brett Smiley was Governor Raimondo's chief of staff, and then City Councilwoman Nerva LaFortune of Ward 3. Out of those candidates, do you plan to support any of them for mayor?
I am supporting Brett Smiley. Basically, I agree with him on the issues philosophically. I know him well personally, but also based on his experience, I think he's far and away the most qualified individual. So it was a pretty easy choice for me.
Looking at some big key issues facing the city, one of them right now is the pension system. There's an unfunded pension liability that's only 26% funded. If this problem gets worse, the possibility could be bankruptcy and then even receivership if it really gets bad. Right now, there's going to be a proposed pension obligation bond on the ballot for voters June 7th, which is about a week from today because we're filming on the 1st. Do you believe the pension obligation bond is the way to go for tackling this issue?
Well, I think there need to be some controls built in to avoid the obvious risk of investment income being earned by the proceeds being less than interest rate, as Seth Magaziner has proposed. And I think those are important to avoid that risk for Providence taxpayers. But there doesn't seem to be any other real solution. And there is definitely a risk of the pension obligations overcoming other critical needs in the city budget, and as a result, leaving the city in dire straits. So on balance, probably support it.
Key issue number 2 in the city currently is education. This is a complex issue with multiple areas of improvement needed, whether it's repairing the buildings with adequate funding, potential reforms like school choice and expansion of charter schools, or just more funding in general. There are a lot of subtopics for this topic. This might be a little bit of a loaded question, but in your opinion, what needs to be done to fix Providence's education system?
There needs to be, I think Angelica Infante Green is very capable and has been doing as good a job as could be expected. The governor's intervention in the teachers union contract was a real missed opportunity where reforms could have been achieved, and I think that's critically important going forward. We're spending for our population significant amounts of money on public education with little or no results, particularly in Providence. And as study after study has shown, I think there's got to be significant reform of the teacher's contract and a real commitment. Again, I think Treasurer Magaziner's efforts in school bond construction, school construction bonds have been a very positive sign. That needs to be continued. But there needs to be a real focus on Providence, where some of the unsafest and unhealthiest schools are contributing to the deterioration, lack of effective results for kids. And that's one of our, I think, one of our most significant obligations as a citizenship, and we're failing miserably. So that led to a state takeover, and I think there's hope for there to be results there. I don't think the governor has been any help in this effort.
Key issue number 3 facing the city also is public safety. I always like to, those are the top 3 issues, but they really are, especially in this mayoral election. And whenever candidates are canvassing, those are probably the top 3 that are heard from residents. There are recent spikes in crime that's concerning residents. Despite crime statistically lowering, there is in this conversation of public safety, there's a crowd that wants to defund the police, and in some cases even abolish the police. And then there's a crowd who wants to fund the police more and are open to reforms like body cameras, more training, and even community policing. Which route do you think the city should go when it comes to the issue of public safety?
I definitely oppose any defunding of the police. Providence has been undermanned for a significant period of time. We have one of the most expensive fire departments in the country. So the minimum manning is a serious problem there, causing a lot of overtime. Again, the union contract is an issue. But the police department needs to be funded with additional schools so that they're at the required capacity in terms of police officers, and that permits community policing. In addition, there are positive signs, thanks to Congressman Cicilline. Family Services received a grant to expand the GO team of having caseworkers, mental health caseworkers, ride with police to go into situations where violence, particularly involving children, like a bad car accident or domestic violence, is occurring. I think the police really support that, because they're not just the bad guys coming into a horrific family situation. They're coming in with a team which is designed to help, and Family Services, a national trauma center. So those kinds of actions by the city council in funding that, and by Congressman Cicilline, have been really supportive. I think there are funds available to do the same kind of addition of mental health caseworkers to law enforcement in Central Falls, Pawtucket, and I think Woonsocket. So I think there are actions that can be taken through partnerships, and Colonel Clements has done an outstanding job in building partnerships with nonprofits in the city. So the police department, I mean, nobody's perfect, but they've been trying in most cases to do the right thing, and a certain amount of crime is inevitable. We clearly need significant gun reforms. The city is awash in everything from ghost guns to everything else, and high school kids are armed. It's just a disaster, as we've seen nationally. So that if significant gun reforms could help in terms of violence, but our police department deserves to be supported and definitely not defunded.
One question I really want to ask you is probably one you've been asked maybe a few times ever since your time on the city council. Had you ever considered getting back into politics in the sense of running for office?
Definitely not. I'm involved to the extent that I support candidates nationally and locally, financially, and I advise certain candidates locally. to that extent, at the age of, I'll be 83 in September. I'm not restarting a political career.
So it's fair to say we can rule out Malcolm Farmer for mayor or Malcolm Farmer for council in 2022.
Yes, you can rule that out. Definitely.
My final question is one that I like to ask everyone on the show to keep the tradition. It's a non-political topic, and it's, in your opinion, what do you think Rhode Island is best known for?
Well, I think a certain amount of constructive nonconformity at times, going back to Roger Williams, but the greatest characteristic, I mean, I've lived here all my life except for the couple of years in Mississippi, and its smallness and the ocean. I think it's a great place to live, and unfortunately, critical components of that kind of drag it down, like public education system and so forth. But really, I think the ocean is a critically important asset. And the fact that you can reach out and touch someone here, and it's very easy for people to know each other and to feel a strong sense of community. And I think that's important. It's a benefit of the state size. It's also in politics. So you got to know a guy attitude is a negative, but on balance, I think community is a very important element of the public welfare, and we have extraordinary opportunities to enlarge the influence of that. So those are I think have been real positives throughout my life.
It absolutely is, and I always like to say, there's the ceiling is high for Rhode Island to grow in those aspects, and everything is close to each other. Everyone knows each other. I mean, touching upon what you said, I mean, I was able to just send you an email, and then right away we already had started the dialogue of setting up this interview. It can't get any better than that. I mean, it's one of the many luxuries we have that I don't think we'd have if we went if you were in that someone would have if they were in New York or a larger state like California. Mr. Farmer, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure of mine to have you on.
Great. I've enjoyed it, Raymond. Thanks for having me.
Thanks. And thank you for watching this episode of Ray-ality TV. If you want to see future episodes as soon as they're posted on the channel, please click the subscribe button down below and the post notification bell icon to the right of it. I'm Raymond Bakari, and I'll see you on the next episode.